Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, everybody, to have a quick conversation with you here. In part, I'm here to give a quick update on where we are with some of our Artemis planning, and also just to kind of help you understand how exciting this time is right now. And I'm looking at this participant list. Jim just noted, we really appreciate your involvement here. I want to thank the organizers who have put a lot of time into this, and all of you who are putting time into this over the next few days and maybe after that. But ultimately, really, this is what we're doing now, right? Like this lunar exploration, sending astronauts to Mars, sending robotic landers to Mars, orbiters. I mean, this is what we're doing. We're going to be doing. Now, many of you will do other things as well, but this is a big part of where NASA's heading. A lot of the science that we'll be conducting in the near future at the moon will help us interpret what we're studying elsewhere in the solar system. So, it's not just about these days or setting up these workshops. This is kind of the path we're on now. And I heard Jeanette's early note about the fatigue, right? This is a lot of work. So it is something that is going to be hard and tiring, but again, it's the job we have. So looking at this participant list, it's great. We've got to take care of each other as a community, work together. No one of us on this list can do all the things, right? But I think there's plenty of where that all of us can do some stuff, right? We're all doing a part of this Artemis and Moon to Mars venture that we're into. I love this list. It's, I'm looking at it and it's like a long list of my, the scientists I grew up with, right? Learning to be a scientist. I see mentors for me on here. I see folks who have come along after me who some I don't even know yet. Now I'm hoping to have the opportunity to meet you in the near future. I mean, I've got like old room or office mates in here. I've got people in working groups that we've worked together, written proposals with, right? So, it makes my face smile, but it also makes my heart smile to see our community stepping up and answering the call here, because that's really kind of where we are now. Sarah Noble and I have talked with the Lunar Surface Science Workshop community over the last few years, really now at this point, about, this is getting more and more real. Like this is real. We're doing this. We flew Artemis 1. We're prepping for Artemis 2 to send our friends in the Orion out around the moon. It doesn't get more real than that. So we really are standing up to answer the call, preparing for how we do the work in the future when we start having astronauts on the surface of the moon. And I do want to just emphasize one last thing. We really do appreciate the time you put into this. These Lunar Surface Science Workshop reports are something we use. They are a referenceable document for us, and they represent more than an individual perspective on what we need to do. They are recommendations basically by a community about what they think is important, what they think needs to be worked on. That's a really important thing for us to have. So I appreciate the time everyone's spending on it. Next slide, please. Some of you probably heard aspects of this talk, but it's really important to emphasize some of this. What are we doing? These are our deep space exploration priorities. I won't read it. I've read it probably to most of you several different times in different venues. But I do want to drive home the point that we're setting up the ability to go and explore the moon and go beyond the moon, learning how to develop a blueprint for exploring space. Most important aspect to that list of documents down there at the bottom of the slide is the time period that they cover. I think one really unique thing that we have going for us right now is the fact that we have now spanned two different political parties in power. We haven't restarted. That's critical. We're on a path that has maintained that political support, and I can't underplay the importance of that for us moving forward. Next slide, please. We, NASA, have been thinking about how do we set up and describe and show traceability for the work that we're doing. And we've started trying to start with the question, why are we doing it? And then use that to drive out our architecture decisions. So we're asking the question, why do we explore? Well, we've identified what we call 3 pillars, 3 circles in a Venn diagram, 3 major areas. You can slice and dice this different ways, but this is how we are doing it. We've identified inspiration for the next generation as a critical element to what we're doing. National posture, the work that we do as a nation, and then science as the other major driver. So I want to make clear how important science is in underpinning the effort that we have going forward and what we're building on. Next slide, please. So how do we take those whys? Why are we exploring? We'll have that over on the right side of the slide. The why we have to have understood first in order to drive out the rest of these answers. Who, what, when, where, how. What are we going to build? Which capabilities do we need? We need to understand the why. That is part of the effort we've been taking underway. And then what you're here to talk about is the mapping, some of the mapping that may be needed to help answer some of these questions, even parts of the why. So I want to just kind of slide in where this discussion over the next couple of days fits into this. And it kind of crosses all these areas. It's some of that critical information that we need in order to help make some of these decisions moving forward. Next slide, please. So what I want to do is show you real quickly what it is that we are doing at NASA and maybe how you can tie into it in addition to working on this lunar surface science workshop. So the agency underwent an effort throughout 2022 to define what we call the Moon to Mars objectives for the agency. We engaged the NASA workforce, international partners, other key stakeholders, and then across industry, academia, and other agencies here in the United States. Asking the community of stakeholders, Jim pointed to that word stakeholder, and I feel the exact same struggles that he was noting with that. Like, we have to understand who wants to use this architecture, why they want to use it, how they want to use it, in order to make informed decisions to help us meet their objectives. And so the first step to that was kind of a big effort engaging the community throughout 2022 to document that information. That's now online. You can go access that and take a look at it. We've broken those goals and objectives down into 4 big groups: science, transportation and habitation, operations, and then infrastructure for the Moon and Mars. And then there are some common tenets, recurring tenets that fit across all of these. Ultimately, then that drives our architecture decisions over there on the left. And what we're setting up now is a yearly review process about how we're making decisions on that architecture. Next slide, please. That is called the Architecture Concept Review. So that is the work that we're doing at NASA with respect to architecture. So each year we're going through a review cycle that includes a report out and this documentation. So we'll provide updates to a document we call the architecture definition document on a yearly basis.
2 minutes.
If you haven't taken a look at that document yet, I would encourage you to do so. The first iteration is out, and we're now kind of in the final effort on this year for making the update coming up later this year. We have a summary document that's a shorter version of that, so maybe like the Cliff Note version of the architecture definition document. And then we've also released a series of white papers, which are shorter, maybe 5-page or so pages that explain specific elements. So we have found we get asked the same questions over and over whenever we go out in public, and these are sort of the answers to some of those common questions. QR code will take you to all this information. I do, again, encourage you all to take a look at that, because this is how our Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate will be communicating with the public about the choices we're making and where the architecture is heading. Next slide, please. So when I talk about architecture, what I mean is basically the elements that help us go and meet those objectives. So you probably have seen this slide or slides like this. We're talking about suits, we're talking about landers, we're talking about rovers, spacecraft, habitation elements, both on the surface and in orbit. The pieces, what are the big pieces we need to put in place? That's what I mean when I say element. We have to decide which of those are needed to make the biggest impact on that overall set of objectives. Next slide, please. And so with that, we'll be laying out a series of missions. I talked about the success of Artemis 1. Artemis 2 we're prepping to fly our astronauts around the moon. Artemis 3 would be our next mission after that. We're looking at the human landing system and working with the providers there to understand what the capabilities they will have. We'll be building a gateway in orbit and looking to the future at designing rovers. Next slide, please. This is the set of landing regions that we announced at League last fall. And so these regions are places that we're looking at and considering for our first landed mission. That'll be the springboard to opening access to other places. And this is where I really want to drive home the point about this workshop. We have a lot of key considerations over on the left-hand side of the slide. We need to understand what data we need, what data products we can generate from that data, and that includes all the mapping that you'll be discussing that will help us understand where the right places to go are. Where we go was one of the big boxes in that slide about how we build an architecture. Where we go to meet objectives, what's there, what we're trying to do when we get there is extremely important. And that's where we need your input about how to proceed moving forward. Next slide, please.
Please wrap it up. Thanks, Jake.
Yep. And this is just right back here. That information will guide how we make these choices about our elements as we move forward. And that was my last slide with information on it. So thank you. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you all have to say over the next 2 days.